I'm Dave Laird,
I'm Matt Booker.
wishing you happy holidays of whatever sort are ethnically opposite here from the Great Concavity.
Oh.
All right, welcome back, y'all, to episode 49.2. Last time on point one, we were talking about the Don DeLillo, David Foster Wallace letters from the Ransom Archive. And I think, Matt, we only got through about 4 letters in an hour and a half. So let's see if we can cover a bit more ground today.
Yes, I think last time we discovered we had a lot more to say, and we had a lot more notes on these letters. And part of the problem is I don't remember exactly everything that we said. So apologies in advance if we do repeat a little bit, but also recognize that maybe not everyone listened to that last episode. But if you are interested in talking or listening to us talk about Don DeLillo and David Foster Wallace, you're in the right place. Although, Dave, there is another episode of this somewhere. What is it called?
49.1.
There
Do you
go.
mean? Oh, yeah. So if you want some more context for what's going on here, probably a good idea to go back and listen to the last episode. And because we're just going to dive in medias res here from where we left off last time. Hopefully this will be the last installment of the letters. I think we can do it in an economical way today, Matt, time-wise.
Yes, so, I think that the 2 episodes is about all I have to say on these letters. I do think they're important. We did talk about them chronologically last time. So when you say we talked about 4 letters chronologically, how far in the correspondence timeline does that get us?
Right. So we left off at the May 1995 letter, and they started in June of 1992. So 4 letters in 3 years or so.
Okay. And they go, we think, until about 2007, right? We couldn't find one from 2008, as far as we know, right?
Yeah, there are quite a number of undated ones there, but July 2007 is the last dated one that I could find. And then I would assume that some of them are maybe after that, but it's hard to know exactly. So,
right.
Yeah.
And so 1995 is Wallace has submitted a draft of Infinite Jest, and I think by, what did you say, May of 1995, he has submitted his final edits, and they have, in fact, already by that point made galleys, or making galleys of the book that summer, and starting to promote it with long lead time publications, getting it to reviewers who I think got galleys in the fall of 1995, and the first reviews, were timed with publication early February in 1996. So that's the context.
And that's a perfect segue into the next letter we have, which is September 95, in which Wallace says that Franzen brought a bound manuscript of My Thing, which is Infinite Jest, and to DeLillo, and apparently made an explosive sound hitting his stoop in New York. And he says, "I know what the fringes of New York are like, and apologize for any early morning alarm."
Yeah, that's funny. That's...
as in like a gunshot going off.
Yeah, that's cute.
Yeah.
And
so Peach sends it to DeLillo, and we get the sense that Wallace is like, very tentative about DeLillo reading this thing. Like any idea that he has of DeLillo reading anything he's written is ultimately so flattering that he can't even handle it.
And yet DeLillo never blurbs his books, I believe.
Yeah, there's not one, hey? Yeah, I can't. None come to mind for me either.
And I think that he says something that he won't blurb a friend's book, and I think, maybe I'm wrong, but Wallace uses that line for some other people as a defense of why he won't blurb their books.
So he's cribbed that from DeLillo. Nice.
I think he adopted it. Might have got it from someone else, but the mention of Franzen too, I think we mentioned this in the last episode, but there have to be, and maybe an equal number of letters to Jonathan Franzen from Don DeLillo. Mm-hmm. And, difference here, obviously, Franzen's still alive, still maybe corresponds with Don DeLillo.
Mm-hmm. Are these in the DeLillo archive papers? Is there a folder of this?
I have to admit, I don't know. I would say no, that whatever letters DeLillo sent to Franzen still has. I doubt that,
because they're both still alive.
I doubt that Franzen sent him copies back of the letters he wrote, and I doubt DeLillo kept copies of the letters he wrote to Franzen. But I guess what I'm speculating on is like someday we will see those whenever Franzen sells his archive, which is like not uncommon for living writers to do, even ones at that age. And it's something that, I wonder if the Ransom Center has pursued with Franzen, because it would make sense to sort of fit that context with the Wallace letters that they have and the
and
DeLillo letters.
Totally.
And Gordon Lish. So they also have all of the Gordon Lish, Raymond Carver stuff. And that is kind of detailed in Tim Greenland's new book, The Art of Editing, which half the book is about Gordon Lish and Raymond Carver. The other half is about Wallace and Peach. And basically all of that, or a lot of that, is at the Ransom Center. I have to admit, I'm way less interested in those Franzen letters than I am.
You don't say.
The Wallace letters. Maybe that's self-apparent.
Did you see that tweet from Sheila Limming that said she's reading that Franzen piece on climate change and quoted that part like...
I saw you pinned to the tweet. Sheila Liming, I think. You pinned a tweet about he will be dead.
Despite the abhorrent fact that I will be dead forever or something like that. Anyways, we don't wish Franzen any actual real harm in this world, but it's fun to joke about for some reason.
So what else is going on in that letter in fall of 1995?
Yeah, so Wallace says that something to the effect that even though DeLillo wrote that Guggenheim thing for him, he doesn't have any expectation that he'd read a percussively heavy-bound manuscript with a cover that's, troubling to me, identical to the passenger safety card on American Airlines flights. As to what cover that's referring to, do you know what the galley covers look like?
I mean, it's pretty similar, just the clouds, right? It's just going to be talking about the clouds. There's a little gray inset thing, but...
Right. So it makes me wonder how much say Wallace had over the cover image, and probably not a lot.
No. I mean, he advocated, for that that image of Fritz Lang. So Fritz Lang, who directed the cast of Metropolis, he wanted to use a specific photo of Fritz Lang. And then Michael Peach said in an interview that Wallace proposed using a photo of a giant modern sculpture made of industrial trash. Kind of like the Ask Me fans, you would think blowing trash. But apparently Little Brown thought that was too subtle and detailed to work as a cover image. So...
clouds articulate the themes and the plot better than something that's actually in the book, I guess.
Well, the clouds actually are mentioned of, I think, in Lateral Alice Moore's office on the wallpaper. There's clouds on the wall. That's there. True. So it's a pretty...
That's pretty inside, though.
Pretty more subtle nod.
Yeah.
A lot of the imagery of the book has now been associated with those clouds, like the first Italian translation, which was the first translation of the book, also had clouds on it. And when we did the Greg Carlisle book Elegant Complexity, we put clouds on it, and I remember talking with Greg about what to do with the cover of Elegant Complexity, and he said, we imagined students using it like, I'll just grab this book with clouds on it, and I need my other clouds book. And so like just making
just
that
double
sort
associate them. Yeah.
Basic connection. But I also have, Dave, this reminds me of another story of when I lived in New York, I applied to work as a marketing assistant at Little Brown. Mm-hmm. Maybe it was like marketing assistant manager of the department or something. It was like mid-level job. I thought I was qualified for. Obviously, I didn't get it, but I worked in publishing at the time, and I interviewed with the woman who was the director of marketing there, and we were talking about specific marketing campaigns, and I basically wanted to just use this whole interview as an excuse to ask her about the marketing campaign for Infinite Jest.
For Infinite Jest, yeah.
In the fall of 1995.
This checks out, yeah.
And she was very dismissive of it. So they had this whole campaign then that was like teasers with postcards. And
right,
like
yeah, I remember this.
Postcard on the front would have the clouds, and it would say like infinite gratitude or infinite, intrigue or infinite mystery. And like they would send these out to booksellers who would just have no fucking clue what it said. They would have no idea.
Yeah. Right.
And again, 1995, you got to think, okay, Google does not exist. Yeah. Most people do not know how to send an email. They have a command line interface at the university library, if that. And just, Amazon.com maybe was founded that year, or maybe it just sold books the year before. Like it was a very new thing. So most book marketing was physical direct mail. Mm-hmm. And, when I asked her about that campaign, because at the time it was widely considered like very successful and actually really helped hype up the book as like the big freaking thing. Mm-hmm. And, I interviewed with her in maybe like 2002, 2003. Mm-hmm. And she was like, no, that it's just so old school. That would never work anymore. That was maybe even a bad idea. And I really hated that. And it's just not like of the modern time. Like the whole industry had changed so much that she was just like, no, you could never promote a book like that anymore. And like the implication was not just that the marketing campaign was a thing of the past, but the
book itself was
promoting a book like that, especially in that way, would never happen anymore.
Yeah.
And I was very demoralized after that because I just thought like,
not only did you not get the job, but
I mean, it just felt like there's not, it was not a very visionary thing. And like, it sounds shitty, but like, I'll challenge you to name a book, published around that time of 2000, 2001, 2002, that is, equal to Infinite Jest. Of course, I think there are none. But like big publishers pulled, this has always been the thing. Like they rely on big bestsellers. Like Harry Potter came along in the late 90s and it made a ton of money. And usually what publishers did was spend that money on publishing like mid-list stuff. And there's a big debate in publishing forever of, is that the right model? And I think that it is, because it allows those people at, the mid-list, if you spend money on marketing those books, it allows them to eat. And, J.K. Rowling can still be a billionaire.
Yeah, right. Well, Underworld came out in 97. Similar in scope, size, and in some ways themes to Infinite Jest.
It's true.
So you challenged me.
Well, that's true. And I would say, I think, the way that book was marketed was a lot different because of who DeLillo was.
Yeah, I have no idea how that book was marketed.
I think it was way less effective. It was considered a book for like fans of DeLillo and other nerds. And, and like how many people actually read it? Well, I mean, how many people actually read it? Like the image of Wallace helped sell Infinite Jest.
Sure.
The image of DeLillo is like, it's not helping anyone. It's not helping the publisher for sure.
Yeah, okay. Although there's some pretty cool photos of DeLillo where he looks like an old cowboy, like at the barn,
Yeah, all right.
He's got his old leather on.
What I was going to say is it's more comparable, like 2000, whenever Heartbreaking Work of Staggering Genius was published. And then 2001, when The Corrections was published, again, a little bit different, but a lot of hype. And, Corrections went on to win the National Book Award and be on Oprah. Obviously,
reluctantly.
none of that for Wallace, right? Like, people bought into the hype but didn't really read the book.
Right. There's a part about that coming up in one of the letters where Wallace talks about people who are just interviewing him about the hype around the book and not the book itself.
Really,
or the hype around the
painful.
hype, and it starts getting meta. Yeah.
It's really painful. And like, there's an interview you can listen to Wallace. Maybe we'll put a link in the show notes. I think it's on the to the best of our knowledge when the book came out, and it's this guy interviewing him who has clearly not read the book, and he just knows that it's a long book, and so every question is just like, so you turned in this really long book. Did you make cuts to it? Or how did they decide to publish such a long book? And it's like, it's just excruciating to listen to over and over. Like, this guy trying to make a good interview out of something he hasn't read. And
that would be a challenge, I think.
It's really painful. It's in this audio collection that Little Brown just came out with a few years ago called In His Own Words, I believe. That's maybe it's an audio download, but it's also a set of CDs, and it has some interviews in it. And like I say, one of the ones around the time Infinite Jest came out, it's just about how damn long the book is. And Wallace makes the point, it wasn't even the longest book published that year. Like, Random House published another book by Vikram Seth, I think, called Suitable Boy, that was like 300 pages longer than Infinite Jest. So he was sort of like, why don't you have Vikram Seth on here talking about how long?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, that would be better.
Not even the champion of that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's an interesting time of how long ago this book really came out, coming up on.
Yeah.
I guess the next anniversary for it would be 30 years.
25.
25. Yeah. 25 in 2021.
Yep. So pretty soon. Yeah.
All right. So, I need to shut up and take a breath now. I'm sorry.
Okay. So back to the first letter we started talking about this episode. So last episode, you mentioned the 3 sort of phases in the letters of Wallace, and the first one being Wallace the Apprentice.
Right.
And so we get a moment of that in this September 1995 letter, where he asks Don about his writing routine, about the kinds of difficulties that he has with procrastination, self-discipline, how he overcomes them. So yeah, you kind of see that like young writer asking the old wise fish about how do you do this and keep your sanity and be productive. Then there's a funny part where he talks about his very first interview with David Straightfield from the Post.
Yeah.
And he was telling him all this really personal stuff and ghastly personal indiscretions, and David's like, look, man, you can't say any of that stuff to interviewers, like, and luckily the guy was nice enough not to print any of them. And he also, during the interview, there was like personal letters from DeLillo tacked to Wallace's wall, and he told him to take those down for future interviews when other reporters come over.
Yeah, I love that. And
so like this very naive young Wallace, it's fun.
Yeah, and that reminds me that interview is amazing, and I think it was in GQ. Is that right? It was in GQ or Esquire.
It says he was from the Post,
Washington Post.
So I don't know where it. Just
there's,
the Post.
There's a photo of Wallace in it that's really bizarre too, where Wallace is wearing like almost like Junko jeans and like a tank top, like it's crazy looking. And it's like really weird lighting, and it especially reproduced as Xerox, like black and white. It looks bizarre.
Oh yeah. And we'll make that the image for this episode.
Totally. In that interview too, he talks about trying to become a Catholic. And that interview with Straightfield, I got to say, was not widely known. I mean, this was my like.
Yeah, I don't think I've read that one.
This was my hobby back in the day, like before. Before I had other hobbies.
Not anymore, man.
Before I had other hobbies. Well, now, like I say, with the internet, everything's online. But there was a period, and some of my fellow listeners here will remember this period where to track down Wallace ephemera like this, you actually had to go to a library and get microfilm or get something out of the archives and get it printed and then Xerox it and maybe scan it or maybe just mail it around to a bunch of friends. And it's kind of like the Dylan basement tapes. Like we had all of this stuff that was not published, and a lot of it is still never been published, or is available online, but of like scans of PDFs that we made way back then. But that was an interview I don't remember tracking down until DT Max and I went looking for it in 2010, 2011
for
maybe.
The biography, yeah.
And
cool.
Eventually tracked it down. I was like, wow, if I had known this back then, that that he was actively trying to convert to Catholicism, like it would have been a fact, on his biography that was not there really. It was out there in the public, but
and there's some brief mention of that in the biography too, right? That he was going through like catechism or whatever, and then just couldn't pull the trigger ultimately.
Well, I think they rejected him. They rejected him because he had too much doubt. I mean, he had too much doubt. But they, that was out apparently in the Washington Post in 1996, and thanks to David Straitfield, who is still around, still writing, still doing great stuff. And so it'd be great. Maybe we should follow up with David Straitfield and get his opinion about that interview.
Yeah, good call. Let's do it. There's another great moment in this letter where Wallace calls DeLillo a recluse because he hasn't been on David Letterman.
That actually bothers me, that when people still to this day sometimes refer to DeLillo as a recluse. And it's like, he is not.
He makes appearances, right?
At all. And
he's not pinching, that's for sure.
No,
right?
Not even close. I mean,
he does readings. We know people who have seen him at readings,
including me,
including.
I would say half the people I know have signed books from him, at least in the U.S.
Half the people you know.
Yeah,
I'm gonna call bullshit.
I only know 2 people though. So.
Right.
Well, let's say among people who are active in the David Foster Wallace Society, a lot of them have signed DeLillo books.
Yeah.
And he makes frequent appearances at signings and festivals and
readings. Like you've seen him at Texas Book Festival, a couple years ago?
Yeah.
When was he there?
2015, 2016.
But so he's around.
Yeah, and I mean...
Even in his 80s, he's doing...
Totally.
Press stuff, yeah.
That's not a recluse.
Yeah.
And he was not that way back then. He's always been willing to do book promotion stuff. And honestly, I think it would have helped his reputation a little bit to stay home from some of those events.
Yeah, for sure. Get the aura of mystique.
Yeah, be a little more reclusive, Don DeLillo.
Sure. I mean, look what it's done for Thomas Pynchon. You get on The Simpsons that way, with a paper bag on your head.
J.D. Salinger to some extent too. But
sure, right. Yeah. In this letter, Wallace says that he was talking about a publicity party, and he says it's the only one I've ever been to, and if God's in his heaven, it will be my last.
I think that was all bullshit too, by the way. I think that he had been to many literary parties, and part of it, part of it is an act that you put on, you have to hate this to be the sensitive artist. And he's a complicated dude, and I guarantee you he went to other literary parties. There's pictures of him at other parties, and not that he necessarily loved it, but that's an exaggeration is all I'm saying. That's some hyperbole.
Yeah, and we know that our man is prone to that on more than one occasion,
for sure,
easily. Yeah. All right, October 1995, another letter. Little Brown sends a manuscript of Infinite Jest for Don to blurb. Wallace effusively implores him only to do so if he has time/will. And he says, quote, if Little Brown's peach put blurb pressure on you or something, I implore you to ignore it. So again, Wallace is falling over himself to, try and act cool to DeLillo to some extent.
But see, I also think here he is feeling like he's become friends with DeLillo, and DeLillo is not, someone that he's just trying to pump for information and blurbs.
Right.
And so he, I think, wants to make it apparent that he's in it for the long haul of friendship and camaraderie and collegiality rather than just I want to use you like an industry person. I think there's a lot of that posturing.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the letter where we see the quote that we said last time, that the novel's a fucking killer. I try to give it every respect.
Yeah.
Which was a quote by DeLillo in the previous letter. In this letter, Wallace talks about Broom of the System, that he was showing off, that he was a really good fiction writer, that he was approval hungry. And he says that Infinite Jest is much less ego hobbled. And, quote, in my tummy, I know that it's better fiction than Broom. Do you think that's true, that
Absolutely.
Infinite Jest is less ego hobbled than Broom?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of showing off in Broom that's just not there in Infinite Jest. And, he talks a lot about what is the heart's purpose. And I think that his purpose is, he's trying to say something bigger than, like, look how smart I am. And,
sure.
Look how funny I am.
That's certainly apparent. Yeah.
And I think that he actually feels a sense of urgency with Infinite Jest that he doesn't feel with Broom the System to communicate something important.
Totally. I think that's very clear. I think that there's some stuff about Infinite Jest that is show-offy, but maybe in a different way. Like there's a lot less critical theory and continental philosophy stuff in your face in Infinite Jest, I think. There's less metafictional stuff probably going on than Broom. So in that sense, I think
for
that's
sure.
true.
But I mean, there's a lot of the stuff about sobriety is really about like him being humbled and brought low. It's like, you go from being in a Harvard PhD program to, mopping the floors of some drunk guy's puke every day. Then, there's, I think that his purpose is coming from that. There's probably always a bit of show offness in his work.
Sure.
But like not in service of something egotistical, like in service of him actually trying to make a connection with other people who he think like him.
Yeah.
And I think he's probably right. I don't love Broom. I know a lot of people like still love that book and like it's just all right for me, dog. It's like,
is that a Randy? What's the guy from
Randy
American
Jackson.
Idol quote? Randy Jackson quote.
Man, I don't love that book, and like, do I want to reread it? Not really. It's like,
I like it. I think it's fun. I haven't read it for over a decade. I think I probably read it in like 2008 or 9. I think there are some moments that I think are some of Wallace's funniest writing for sure. But yeah, overall, it doesn't gel for me in the same way that The Pale King or Infinite Jest do.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, that's what you want out of a writer, is for them to mature, especially one who's going from 22 to 33. And, he's 33. I think he is a little more pragmatic about what his cuts are too. Like the stuff that he cut out of Infinite Jest is like
totally.
When you're 22, it's really hard, I think, to take notes from someone else unless they're Don fucking DeLillo, right?
Sure.
And I think that's what he wants. Is like he's going to Don DeLillo to be like, hey, give me advice. But the relationship changes at some point, and DeLillo's like, I'm not going to give you advice, like.
You're as successful as I am now in some ways. There's a great moment in this letter where they're talking about Mark Lehner, and I think Wallace is kind of comparing his style in Broom to Mark Lehner, whose book My Cousin, My Gastroenterologist, Wallace mentioned several times, I think, in interviews. He calls Lehner the Prince of Darkness here to Don DeLillo.
Yeah, and see, I think
due to how self-aggrandizing his writing is.
And see, I think that book is hilarious.
It is funny. I read it just only because Wallace talked about it in interviews, and I think Wallace said that it's like an MTV like music video. Like it's purely entertaining, and it's funny, but there's no thematic substance or humanity to it, I think is his point. So in that sense, he sees him as the Prince of Darkness.
It's very juvenile, and
sure.
And I think
a lot of body humor.
Yes. So I don't think Mark Lehner is the Prince of Darkness, but I do think those books serve a purpose. Like they're just way more absurdly funny on their face. Like that's the only purpose. Like they're not trying to be great literature. I did read Mark Lehner's last book, which was really atrocious.
Oh yeah.
And I would not, he sort of took a break and did some like kind of straight writing that's not in that style. And then came back to this style, I think in about 2014, 2015. And it just really didn't work. It's called Gone with the Mind. I take that back. He did Sugar Frosted Nutsack in 2012.
Speaking of juvenile.
Yeah. But the Gone with the Mind book, the main character is called Mark Lehner, and he's doing a reading at a Cinnabon in a mall.
Okay.
And just waiting for his mom
fun.
to show up. Like it's really bad.
That sounds very depressing.
But I mean, if Wallace was at all worried about being compared with Mark Lehner, like it was not necessary to worry about that.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well, the next letter in the series is a response from Don DeLillo to Wallace, and there's I think there's 2 of these in the file at Ransom that's meant for Wallace. I don't know if they just got mixed in or what, but DeLillo says to him that your first book was more fun, but that doesn't mean you've left pleasure behind forever. In Wallace's previous letter, the one we were just talking about, he complains to DeLillo of funlessness in his writing. I assume after he's finished writing Infinite Jest that he's never been more professionally flummoxed, he says. So DeLillo's kind of like trying to lift him up here, it seems like. He tells him that Mao 2 was not fun at all. It was, quote, a lot of grim digging, forced labor all the way, and that he had to fight for every sentence. He talks too about White Noise being, even though it's tinged with comedy, that there was like a depressing mood in the room while he was writing it for the year. And then he says, I don't see anything in the early pages of the new novel that would lead me to believe that you're dying of funlessness. Which he's speaking about, the Galley of Infinite Jest that he has there.
Yeah, I find this really fascinating because this is very much inside baseball between writers, right? And that they don't want their work to become just work, right? It's got to be entertaining and fun for them to do. And, you hear this all the time with people who make their hobby their job. It's like, well, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. It's like, or you will grow to hate your hobby because it becomes your job.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
It's like, well, you used to love to paint, but now that you need to do it to make money and you're in your studio every day, there's a lot of pressure on you.
Sure.
And becoming a professional writer and making that work every day. I mean, I find writing even a very short thing to be extremely difficult and sort of soul crushing almost. And
I feel that way about academic writing. Like if I'm not in a specific program where they're awarding me marks and like late penalties, I'm just probably never going to write an academic thing again in my life because I find it to be so soul destroying.
Well, it's incredible amount of work. I mean, just the toll that it takes on you mentally and spiritually.
Spiritually,
I'm serious. I think it can deplete you and really fuck with your sense of identity. And the pressure that Wallace has is that he's successful from day one. So there's pressure on him.
Yeah.
Every bit of his professional life, he feels this sort of pressure to be better and sort of outdo what he did. And I think, with Infinite Jest, he does it, but it was work. It was a lot of years and years of work. I think in one interview, he says, like, someone asked him, like, so you spent 3 years on this, the same idiot guy I mentioned earlier. And,
right.
And Wallace is like, yeah. But we know for a fact that there's stuff in Infinite Jest that he wrote in grad school that ended up, in the book 5-6 years later.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that amount of time, like you go back in your head right now, what's 5-6 years ago, and you've basically accomplished just that in your professional life. Like you've just done nothing, or you have nothing to show for it.
It's almost like us with the podcast. Like it was exactly 4 years ago.
Yeah, it's exactly
month,
like us with the podcast. Yeah.
Just a vacuous pile of rambling, you know.
But you know, this reminds me of him. So him asking DeLillo for advice. This is something I think about, is that he probably wrote to other writers that he admired who didn't write back. And I know for a fact that he admired a lot of other writers. And I mean, we could name several that he names: Cynthia Ozick, William Gass, Cormac McCarthy. But DeLillo writes back, and so the whole reason why we're having this conversation, and the whole reason why the Ransom Center spent a lot of money on these archives, is like these two guys, they wrote back to each other a lot.
Do you happen to know how much they bought these for? Is that public information?
I think it is public information. I'm not sure about the DeLillo archives because it was bought before the Wallace ones, before I was paying attention to this. But I think that you can dig up the records for the Wallace archive, and I think that they spent $250,000 on it, which is a bargain. No, it might be more than that, might be double that, but it's not too much more than that. I mean, they spent $1 million on Gabriel Garcia Marquez. They spent maybe $2 million. They spent $1 million on J.M. Cutsey. They just bought Rachel Cusk's archive.
Oh yeah.
I think they spent $1 million on Norman Mailer. So they spent less than that on Wallace. You know, he was only 46.
Sure. Yeah.
Published less than any of those guys.
Right.
But you know, the value of it has increased tenfold because it's their most requested archive at the Ransom Center for, 10 years running now, 9 years running.
Yeah. That's pretty wild.
So the value of it is, you could put that kind of a number on it, but really part of the value is inherent in just these two guys having a conversation. And I guess where I'm going with this is like, I think, how to say this delicately. There's no real delicate way to say it. I think that like DeLillo is a good writer. Is he the greatest writer of all time? No. And like we think of him in
Wallace?
These great terms. Well, maybe. I'll put it this way. I think Infinite Jest is better than anything DeLillo ever wrote. And I think that it will be taught and read.
I would agree with that. But I think Underworld is not far behind.
It's not taught near as much. The readership.
I think White Noise is probably taught more than Infinite Jest, though.
Probably, but I also
don't know if that's the litmus test for great literature.
I don't think it's a great book. I mean, I think White Noise is good, but I don't think it's great literature. Sorry, I don't.
I will fight you, but that's okay.
Well, you can fight me verbally.
I mean, I think the fact that here from New Zealand, that fight's going to be a long stretched arms.
Jump through the Skype and punch me.
I'll punch you in June, Matt. Shot in the arm. I mean, the fact that we do a podcast about Wallace probably is evidence that we think he's, obviously our favorite writer. I would not do a podcast about any other writer.
Here's where I'm going with
DeLillo.
it. Let me take this to its logical conclusion, is that there were people writing who Wallace admired just as much, who I think should be read just as much as Don DeLillo. And I could name some names of them who I think were great writers around the same time. And maybe Wallace would not agree with this, but other people might, who, are more, I would say, in the postmodern experimentalist vein that Wallace wanted to be. And I don't think Don DeLillo is in the top ranks of those people. And I would put John Barth in there, and that the whole like Wallace thing trying to kill John Barth with Westward, I don't think so. I don't think that was success. And I'll tell you,
Patriarch for his Parasite.
No, I think that like Westward is not a great piece either. And especially because it has such a bad agenda, like whatever the art's heart purpose is, right? We said that's good with Infinite Jest, maybe less so with Broom, really bad with Westward. It's like the Heart's purpose is like really academic and off track. And honestly, I don't think Westward is as good as anything that John Barth wrote. And Barth, DeLillo, all of these guys have mixed bag of books. A lot of Barth, I would say a lot of DeLillo books I would not recommend. Like,
there's quite a lot of DeLillo's catalog that I haven't
pretty much everything
like
since
most
Underworld
of his early stuff.
Like pretty much everything in the past like 25 years. Like it's 20 years of like misses, right? And it's like, yes, we all like Mautu, you all like Libra, Underworld, White Noise, you know. And then
it's funny. I've read everything since White Noise to present, and only one book before White Noise, which was Great Jones Street. So I haven't read like End Zone Americana.
Oh, you got to read
Ratner's Star. There's quite a few I haven't read that I still intend to get to, the names. There are some misses for sure in the last 20 years. I thought 0K was pretty strong though. I would rank that relatively high.
For me, man. It was just all right. Yeah. And like, I'm not saying Wallace is perfect either. I just said I didn't think Westward was great. I didn't think Broom was great. I think a lot in Oblivion is great. I think The Pale King is great. Even though he didn't get to publish it the way he wanted in his lifetime. All I'm trying to say is like, Don DeLillo, I don't want anyone to get the impression that I think that he is like God, you know?
Right.
I think that.
Well, what if I told you that there's someone on the Wallace Society board who thinks that Underworld is a better novel than Infinite Jest?
I would say they're wrong. They're wrong.
Okay, I'm gonna follow up with that person and let them know you said that.
You should.
I agree with you though. I think they're wrong too.
I think that if Wallace had a lengthy correspondence with Cormac McCarthy, with William Gass, or with, you know, some of these other people of a different generation who I also admire, Guy Davenport, Hugh Kenner, all of those guys, John Hawkes, Gilbert Sorrentino, you know, we would maybe look at them in a different light. Or you would say, oh, I haven't read, you know, The Lime Twig, or I haven't read, you know, Tidewater Tales. And it's like Marshall Boswell, when we had him on the show, he was saying kind of that like more people need to go read Tidewater Tales. And
he was pretty keen.
I think that there's a skewed thing that these archives can create, like where we study these letters like holy relics, and kind of they are. But if it had been Wallace and Cormac McCarthy talking about Suttree and Outer Dark and, you know, the Cities of the Plain, like we would be having a different kind of conversation just because that dude wrote back. And I think a lot of this whole conversation just hinges on the fact that like maybe Don DeLillo was a little bit lonely and bored and was just like, hey, this guy wrote me, like, I'm gonna write him back. Like he didn't meet him.
So
he
you're
didn't
saying that Cormac McCarthy is greater than Don DeLillo?
Maybe a little more well adjusted up top. I don't know. I'm just making that up. But
I would rank DeLillo much higher than McCarthy. For my own personal literary taste, but I also think McCarthy's great. So
I think McCarthy has fewer misses than DeLillo.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's reasonable. I have read way less McCarthy than DeLillo, so I need to. Oh God,
you're missing out. I'll go ahead and I'll go ahead and rank my like top 5 McCarthy, and like I absolutely love the Border trilogy, All the Pretty Horses, Crossing, Cities of the Plain. If you haven't read The Crossing, that actually might be my favorite one, although I could go and reread All the Pretty Horses every year. I absolutely love that book. But I like The Crossing even better, especially the first half with the wolf. Blood Meridian, Wallace were raves about it. I absolutely love that book.
Yeah, it's good.
And then his, you know, the stuff that he's published lately, The Road and No Country for Old Men. I mean, that stuff is, if nothing else, way more entertaining than anything DeLillo's published in 20 years. And
20 years.
Yeah. I mean, that's...
Yeah, I see what you mean.
That's
I think The
argument.
Road's great. I think it's brilliant. Yeah.
So I just think we'd have a different conversation if that guy wrote back.
Sure. All right.
And this is part of me also.
Speaking of which...
I'm getting more curmudgeonly as we go on, as you can tell.
Yeah, totally. as you get later into the Austin evening.
Yep.
Closer to bedtime. Okay, so we've done what, 2 letters today so far? We're at 46 minutes.
Yeah, you get the gist.
Should we keep cruising? Yeah. So November 14th, we get a new letter. No year on this one. I assume that it's 96, probably. He writes to DeLillo to congratulate him on Underworld. And he says, quote, "Even out here where grapes do not grow, I have heard that you finished and that congratulations are in order. And these are hereby tendered, along with expressions of keen anticipation." That's it. That's the only thing we have in that letter. Then we have June 25, I assume maybe 97.
Let me go back a little bit. And so 95, sure. Late 95, December 95, January of 96, February 96, somewhere in there is also whenever Wallace goes to the set of Lost Highway.
Okay.
So
that's going to come up shortly. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I think, Wallace in 96 read Underworld, offered extremely detailed comments, and that made a huge impression on Don DeLillo. And so, in those phases we're talking about, if you go in from apprentice to sort of genius phase, Wallace is corresponding a lot with his contemporaries. And I think this is the point where Don DeLillo reciprocates and views him as a contemporary of a fellow, master and a colleague. It's like, this guy's a fucking genius.
Yeah.
Whereas before,
we're going to see some of that shortly here.
Yeah. All right. Keep going.
All right. So June 25th letter, Wallace talks about fan letters.
What year?
18-page outpouring. This one doesn't have a year, but I'm going to assume that it's 96 or 97.
Okay.
Probably 96. There's a few without a year, and then the next one of the year is November 96. So probably this is 96 as well. June 96, March 96, September. Yeah. Anyways. That he got an 18-page fan letter that ended with, "Don't worry, I won't try and come find you."
It was not me. I never wrote him a fan letter.
You're sure that wasn't you, Matt?
I sort of wish that I had wrote him a fan letter, to be honest with you.
Yeah, you would have got a response.
Yeah.
Wallace in this letter complains there are no good theaters or places to watch art films, and I think he's talking about, would this be normal, I think, right now?
Yeah.
Yeah. He does say that he watched Jim Jarmusch's film Dead Man, though, recently. And then he talks about Lost Highway here, too, and says that it turned out to be ghastly, Lynch at his worst, and the Lynch piece was even cringier.
See, I so disagree with that.
Yeah, on the piece or on Lost Highway, or both?
Both. I mean, I don't think Lost Highway is ghastly. Like, I thought it was super interesting.
Wallace has some hot takes on film in these letters, actually. Between him and his comments on P.T. Anderson.
I really disagree with him on that, too.
Yeah. He does recommend Twin Peaks, though, in this letter to Don DeLillo.
Yeah, and I mean,
which you can't disagree with.
Okay for that, but I mean, there's a type of Twin Peaks person, I think, who also appreciates Fire Walk with Me as much or more than the first series. And I get the impression Wallace is recommending the TV show, the first TV show, and not Fire Walk with Me.
Yeah, that's a different beast for sure. Specifically Twin Peaks here. He also praises the cover of Underworld and says that it's going to get massive attention. He's really effusive in these letters coming up about Underworld.
Kind of ass kissing.
Kind of, yeah. But I mean, wouldn't you, if you were writing to one of these guys, specifically Wallace? Maybe a little bit.
I'm pretty curmudgeonly, dude.
I've got 3 criticisms and 1 point of praise, Wallace. Here they are. There's another undated letter after this in which he calls Underworld Don's most moving book, and he says that parts of the epilogue made him cry. And I would have to agree that the epilogue to Underworld is some of DeLillo's best writing as well.
I would agree with that. I think the Pathco at the Wall stuff too at the beginning is pretty great.
So great. Yeah. Who is it? The director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, Frank Sinatra, and
I think Jackie Gleason.
Yeah, I think that's it. They're at the baseball game with the shot heard around the world, and the pages of Bruegel's Triumph of Death are falling on them. Oh man, that's some good stuff.
Yeah, and Wallace in one of those letters in 96, maybe 97, says that his dad has this memory of the shot heard around the world in 1951. And he kind of shares that with DeLillo, and DeLillo, I could tell, really enjoyed that. But yeah, the epilogue, I mean, that's like, yeah, okay. I mean, I don't want to get in too much into Underworld. Let's move on.
Sure. Okay. Then we have an undated Christmas card. It's a postcard featuring the Virgin Mary and baby Jesus, and it says, "May love and peace and joy abide. Amen." And that's it. There's actually quite a few like Catholic specific greeting cards that Wallace sends to DeLillo.
Very sincere and like
yeah.
I don't know where he got those Christmas cards. They're terrible, honestly. He sent some
like
to
the Catholic supply store or something.
Yeah, he sent some to David Markson as well, and they're just very bad.
Oh yeah. March 16th, no year. I think it's 96, probably still here. He says that he's talking about the book tour. Maybe in that case, what month did Infinite Jest come out? In 96?
February 96.
February. Okay, so this would be 96 then. He says that the nadir of the book tour was a woman screaming at him about how his catalog of essays was deeply insensitive to damaged and deformed infants.
Wow.
Which there's a lot of in Infinite Jest, so that's fair, I guess. He tried to be nice to reporters who hadn't read the book, but were only reporting on the hype and the hype around the hype, and that it seemed like the book itself had become like the most photographed barn in America, which of course is a big scene in white noise. I can imagine that would have been pretty exhausting to have that kind of interview question come up over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, and just a whole interview structured around it. It's really excruciating to listen to. If you haven't done it before, go and listen to someone who hasn't read the book trying to ask David Foster Wallace about the hype around the book. It's really bad.
Yeah, that's awful. Then we have September 7th, no year, but we're assuming 96 here. He very cringily asks Don to be a Guggenheim reference again. He says that Franzen and Eugenides got one, and John thinks that Wallace has a good chance this time, since those two got it.
And there's a reference to this in the Death is Not the End story in Brief Interviews, where he's talking about the poet and the poet's poet, Nobel Prize winner guy. And he puts a footnote saying, yet never the recipient of a John D. and Catherine G. MacArthur, no, not MacArthur, of John Solomon Guggenheim Foundation grant, despite hiring a graduate student to fill out the tedious forms in triplicate. And you can tell, Wallace, that's autobiographical, and that he never got a Guggenheim, even though he applied for it multiple times. And you have to go around asking, Don DeLillo to write a letter of recommendation.
Reference letters. Yeah, totally. It is surprising to me that Franzen and Eugenides got Guggenheims, but not Wallace. That seems really backwards political and almost unjust to me. Yeah. November 96, we have a Greetings from Texas postcard, and a lot of these postcards are quite funny and like pedestrian in what they depict. I mean, is there any other kind of postcard than one that is pedestrian, I guess? But it's funny to see high literary authors stooping to that level of banality. I like it.
I think he was very aware of that.
Totally, yeah. His normal guyness, his average dude persona stuff. Yeah. In this one, he references his girlfriend. I would assume this is Mary Carr in November 96.
No, this is Kimberly
different
Harris.
One.
Kimberly Harris.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that checks out.
He's already... Or it could be Juliana. No, I think it's Kimberly Harris because he's...
Yeah, that makes sense because if he's just moved to normal...
Yeah.
Right. Because isn't there stuff about Victoria Harris saying that she was basically pitching her daughter to Dave at his job interview.
Yeah.
Like, oh, by the way, we have this beautiful daughter. You should date her. And then they did.
Pretty much.
Yeah. That's good. There's a reference to Nan Graham, the first one in this postcard, and Nan is going to come up a lot afterwards. That's DeLillo's editor, and incidentally, she married Wallace's best friend in the whole world, Mark Costello.
Yep.
He's pumped his girlfriend for gossip, he says, and he's learned that Pafko at the Wall is part of something larger. Says he's sorry it won't see print as a novella. He guessed the publishers changed their mind, which is funny because that later did get published as a novella, Pafko at the Wall, which is the opening 70 pages of Underworld. So if you have Underworld, you don't really need to own Pafko at the Wall unless you're a completionist, book collector wise. He says in this that Pafko is his favorite work since the Ruby sections of Libra. That's cool. And here he says at the end, happy holidays of whatever sort are ethnically apposite, which I thought was a very funny way to phrase Merry Christmas.
It's like, does he not know DeLillo's Italian Catholic?
Catholic, yeah, totally. Yeah, it's good. January 1997, our next letter. He has a really weird reference here about Oppenheim, who was the J. Robert Oppenheim, who designed the atomic bomb. He's convinced that his comment, the Shiva comment about behold, I'm the destroyer of worlds, at the first test blast, because he saw his own face over the desert, his own horrific bust. I don't remember what exactly that's in reference to or apropos of, but it struck me as an interesting moment.
He's got to be talking about Underworld there, right?
Yeah, I think so, yeah, because nuclear bombs play a pretty big role there.
Yeah, I would assume he's talking about Underworld, but...
Yeah, most of these letters in this time period do talk about Underworld for the most part. He says here that Nan gave Wallace a 7.9 kilogram Underworld manuscript, which Wallace then scanned for typos, which in 1,414 pages found maybe 4 confirms. And then he says, whoever typed this is not a human being. That's pretty impressive.
That's great.
Almost 1,500 pages, 4 confirmed. I love that. Sounds like a military terminology, kill confirmed, I've been playing a lot of Call of Duty this week, so that's on my brain. He says here to Don that it's his best work ever so far, and seems like a synthesis of all the things that Don has written before it. That it reads like jazz. That's nice. It's a good compliment, I think.
Yeah, because DeLillo loves jazz.
Yeah. He also says here that Nick Shea is his most affecting character ever. Which is funny because in the last week, you and me and some other Wallace friends were texting about the fuckboys of Don DeLillo's literature. And that I think I said that the character from Cosmopolis is the ultimate iteration of that. And then Mike Miley said Nick Shea is also a fuckboy. And I was like, yeah, that's true.
I mean, there's a lot of scholarship out there on Underworld. Again, we keep coming back to it just for this time period, but the whole waste management, Wallace is interested in that angle as well. Some of it I think they're getting from Pynchon, who writes about right by waste. I do agree that part with Nick and Marion. If you haven't read the book, this probably makes no sense. So,
sure.
Where
our entire podcast, yeah.
98 now.
Now we're at February 97. This is another Dawn to Dave response. They take heart, listener, and Matt, my co-host. The letters get less compressed time-wise after sort of this period. This seems to be the most prolific period around Infinite Jest and Underworld.
Gotcha.
So Don says here to Dave that he doubts he'll get many responses to Underworld as nuanced as Dave's, which were, quote, so deep-reaching and so well-tuned to the tics and tremors of the book. So that's nice that Wallace seemed to be one of Don's most attentive readers, before Underworld was published.
Yeah, because I think
That's cool.
a lot of these writers, they get feedback that's like, something massive like this, and some the feedback will be like, "Oh, it was great, I loved it."
Yeah, exactly. You're like, cool. I'm glad I just spent like 5 years
They're
writing
like,
that.
"Well,
To
what
hear
part?"
one. Yeah.
That made a big impression on DeLillo, I think.
Yeah, it really seems like there's like a level and depth of appreciation there for the way that the kind of reader that Wallace was. There's a great line here where Don says, "I do hear a kind of music when I write, but I also see words across a sentence sort of matching up and mating."
See, this is ultra pretentious to me. Like, come on. Come on.
It's so DeLillo-esque, though. And I mean, it can't be anything else because it's Don DeLillo, but it's hilarious. Yeah.
I mean, it's just so easy to parody that style then. Like,
yeah, right.
I don't know.
Yeah. The writing as music, yada, yada, yeah. That's fair criticism, I think.
It's great, but again, this is the one book that he, structures this way with this lengthy book. Like, I don't know. I mean, a lot of the other stuff he does after this, right? The next book after this is like 90 pages, right? Body Artist.
Body Artist is next. Yeah, I think so.
Cosmopolis, which some people love. I hated that book.
Yeah, it's not my favorite. I think it's got some...
That was terrible.
Yeah, not super strong.
Point Omega was good, but again, it was like 90 pages.
Right. Yeah.
0K. I already issued my verdict on that one.
Sure. January 30th. There's no date for the year, but I think it's 98, given where it falls in the letters. Wallace says to Don here that he saw Underworld in a Las Vegas airport while there to cover the adult video Oscars, which he says was a proposal which sounded neat when I accepted, but which turned out to be like spending 3 days in Bosch's hell panel. Hermanius Bosch, famous Renaissance painter who depicts hell a lot in his work, not unlike Bruegel.
Which is fun. Yeah, I should have said The Triumph of Death, right?
Yeah, right. That would have been a more
DeLillo.
brown-nosing DeLillo reference, I guess. He references Robert McLaughlin in this letter, who is a professor across the hall from him at ISU, who's been really involved at the conference over the last few years. Yep. He calls him one of the nicest human beings I've ever seen up close.
I really hope Bob got to see that. Me too. Bob got to see that.
Yeah. I don't know Bob very well, but from everything I've seen of him at the conferences, that checks out really well to me.
Totally.
Yeah. Then we have a short note from May 98. He talks about, in past tense, it was a treat to have dinner with Don and Franzen. Quote, "It was also a treat to see Franzen more docile and cowed than I've ever seen him. I wish I had that effect on him."
See, I'm pretty sure we discussed this last time.
I think we did, yeah. Yeah, that's good. That's a nice moment. October 20th, we're assuming 98. There's no year. He talks about brief interviews here. He says that it's a very dark and sad book. Also, that men's rooms are places of mortal drama, in my opinion. If I ever wrote a play, it'd be set in a men's room.
Well, and he does put that part in brief interviews and in Infinite Jest that's, partly there, set in a men's room. And it's just all right for me. I don't get whatever his fascination is there, like with it.
Oh, man, the men's room brief interviews chapter is so funny to me.
This is something that just makes me, maybe someone else has had this experience, is that there's a thing in one of Ben Lerner's novels.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's maybe in 1004. It could be in the Leaving the Atocha Station, where he talks about men's rooms. And like that bit to me is way better and memorable than whatever the hell Wallace was interested in. Like Wallace was interested in like a really antiquated men's room thing where there was like,
an attendant and like, yeah totally. Like perfume or like colognes and stuff.
I've been in maybe like 2 or 3 restaurants, like bathrooms like that in my life. Like
yeah,
rooms like
totally.
That.
Yeah. Maybe less. Yeah.
So whatever he is into, I didn't get it.
I don't think that's from 1004 because I feel like I would maybe remember that, and that's the only Lerner I've read so far.
It must be from Atocha Station.
Yeah, it must be. Yeah.
It's definitely not in Topeka School, which we'll have to talk about at our year-end wrap-up. thing.
Yeah, I haven't read that yet, but I'm seeing a lot of buzz, and I would be interested to check it out soon.
Well, I have read it, so we can talk about it later. Yeah.
Cool. November 98. He sees that Don got a National Book Award nomination, and that, quote, "You're going to win," for Underworld. Incidentally, Don DeLillo did not win.
He did not win.
By Charles Fraser won. But Wallace did say that his only competition would be Cynthia Ozick. And that, quote, "Though I yield to no U.S. Gentile in my admiration for her," speaking of Ozick. I guess she's Jewish. Is that what he means?
That's correct. It's a really clumsy way of putting it. I mean,
sure.
I really like Cynthia Ozick.
I haven't read anything by her, but I should. Wallace talks about her a lot.
I don't know that she is, as widely regarded as Wallace would like for her to have been.
Yeah, I get that impression.
And I think she often gets thrown out like, "Oh, do you like women writers?" And like he uses her. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's still around. I don't think she's published anything in a while, but maybe she did publish some essays. I can't remember, but I mean, her novel, that Puttermesser Papers, that was amazing. She's got a lot of short stories and essays. I see what he likes in her, and she was definitely as celebrated, like awards wise, like if you go off of National Book Critics Circle Award and all of that stuff, like she was recognized for her greatness in a way that Wallace was not. I mean, she produced a lot. She wrote over probably 50 years.
Yeah.
That's interesting that, we haven't really, I think Lucas Thompson writes about Cynthia Ozick, or maybe
that would make sense. Yeah.
Or maybe it was Boswell, but, yeah, she's an interesting choice. I mean, that Puttermesser Papers was, I think it came out around the same time as Underworld.
Yeah, I think that is correct.
So maybe he was thinking that would be the winner of the National Book Award, but it was this like horribly popular novel with Charles Fraser.
Then he says, "You will win," and Pynchon, in a gesture of staggering generosity, will leap to his feet, remove his wig and violet contacts, and lead the ovation.
Yeah, that didn't work out.
And that one goes out to Beau Butler and Pynchon in public. Didn't happen. Sorry. Yeah. Sorry, guys. And then there's that funny note here, which I mentioned last time, about DeLillo encrypting his letters from his home address through aluminum foil and routes through a mail drop box in Briny Breezes, Florida.
Yeah, that's funny.
That's good. July 1999, a very quick note, talks about cognitive dissonance whenever Don says he's read something Wallace has done. Wallace just can't wrap his head around the fact that Don DeLillo would have read his work. So that's still fanboyish quality to the letters here. October 1999, Wallace says, "I am not working well." He's trying to quit tobacco here. He feels lugubrious after working. Nothing that he writes feels alive. He says that when writing feels alive, he craves it like Edmund craves Turkish delight in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Which Wallace's copy of that book by C.S. Lewis is at the archive, and I spent 5-10 minutes flipping through it as well when I was there, in addition to White Noise and one or two others. He talks about here Franzen's mother dying, and Wallace went to the funeral, and that John looked like a man who'd had a lot of his soul sucked out. This moment gave me a bit of pause, Matt. I'm not going to lie, that Jonathan Franzen might be human after all.
Of course. I mean, I feel bad for the loss of his mother there. That's terrible.
Yeah, of course. We say these things in jest, of course, but there were moments here that I was like, oh, these are empathic moments,
Oh no, to be clear, a lot of my distaste for this man as a human being is not in jest, is sincere.
Yeah, sure.
And I think his literature is even worse than others think it is. But I wouldn't take any pleasure in him like being sad that his mom died. Like, that's terrible.
Yeah, of course, of course.
I think that it's late 1999, early 2000 that Magnolia comes out, The Matrix comes out.
And yeah, that's in the next letter.
Yeah, let's go there.
March 2000.
Yeah, I like that he calls The Matrix Campbell grade mythopoeia. Joseph Campbell grade mythopoeia.
Yeah, that's good.
And I was like, wow, that's pretty.
That's pretty apt. Yeah.
But his hatred of Magnolia Man was like, I sort of get it, but I disagree with it.
Yeah,
you know?
I totally agree with that assessment. Yeah, here's where he says that it's grad schoolish in a bad way. I'd run the opposite way for several blocks if you see it on a marquee. Hideously overrated.
And what's funny about this is later, long after his death, we find out that for a very brief time, Wallace taught Paul Thomas Anderson.
That's right, yeah.
At Emerson. And I'm sure Wallace never made a mention of it. I doubt he remembered this kid, that he taught him, or if he did, he never mentioned it.
Yeah. Just it's funny because I would say like Paul Thomas Anderson became way more famous than Wallace did.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, a guy who's at the Oscars every year is way more famous than Wallace ever.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So you think he probably would have mentioned it, you know?
Oh, for sure. I also think that, especially where we are with movies right now, you know, this Scorsese debate that's going on, versus Marvel Comics. I am firmly in the camp of the people like Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson and Martin Scorsese of, if there's an us versus them in this, that's what interests me more in going to the movies and cinema and not going to see Iron Man Part 7. So
yeah, I am straight up fatigued on superhero stuff.
And I think there's a part of Wallace that would be like way more interested in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Yeah, I think you're right.
than the Phantom Thread. I can't see Wallace really loving that movie. Just throwing a wild guess.
No, I think you are onto something there, based on what we know about Wallace's movie tastes.
Right.
Yeah.
So take that with a grain of salt.
Sure.
He says that he likes David Lynch, but hated Lost Highway.
Yeah.
Hated Magnolia. I'd say
Loved
he liked
Boogie
The Matrix.
Nights,
Liked
right.
The Matrix.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, he says about Boogie Nights that it's like the kind of fiction that he wants to write, right?
And I think there's a lot of similarities with Boogie Nights and the way that Infinite Jest is structured. That would be a cool paper.
Yeah. You could even bring a little Big Red Sun into that paper, I'm sure.
I'm sure, but Infinite Jest is obviously better work of literature. But
sure. Yeah.
It's just always bad when someone you admire talks bad about something you hate. I'm like, I feel like you should like it, man. Like,
yeah.
It's like feels a betrayal,
Yeah, totally. Wallace in this letter talks up Dave Eggers' heartbreaking work of Staggering Genius, says he likes it.
I thought he said he liked it okay. He wrote that.
Oh, is that what it is?
Blurb.
Liked it okay?
He's like, I liked it okay. But he didn't know that Eggers was going to use that whole letter as the blurb on the back of the book. I think that was sort of done without his permission.
Classic ruse. He says that he donates to McSweeney's, that it's cutting edge lit.
That's true.
That's cool. Yeah. The idea that you get between these letters is that Wallace tells Don about mainstream stuff, and that Don tells Dave about serious subtitled like high art movies.
Yeah.
This is a good arrangement, he says. You feed me on tips on serious subtitle art movies, and I feed you tips on mainstream US movies.
Yeah, because you can imagine, Don DeLillo going to the Film Forum in Manhattan and seeing every sort of bizarre, documentary that you cannot see in normal Illinois.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. Wallace talks about the McCain campaign for Rolling Stone that he did here, and now known as, quote, 3 months that tickled the prostate of the American century. That's pretty good. Yeah, he says of it that it like confirms his intuition that fiction is what he's really supposed to do, when he compares the comparative ease of nonfiction, like writing up Simba.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. Then we have April 2000 letter. Wallace talks about that he really trusts Peach, really trusts the little brown copy editors. And then he gets into a whole thing about like downloaded music, or like the process of like sending files instead of like actual paper manuscripts makes him feel really like disconnected emotionally, makes him feel old, sort of like the way heavy metal music makes him feel.
Yeah, and you know, this is interesting to me in that he Up Simba comes out in 2000, and Little Brown did this publishing experiment to do a longer version of it, and you had to have this really weird formatted file reader to even download it and read it, and people quickly just ripped it and, you know, posted raw HTML and stuff.
Oh yeah.
And you know, him asking Don DeLillo's thoughts on online publishing is like me writing a letter to my great grandma asking how to like which is better, like Blu-ray or HD DVD. It's like you really expect Don DeLillo to have great insights on this.
Yeah, I love it.
And you know, the sort of predictions that none of them really saw the writing on the wall of what the internet would do to bookstores and book publishing.
Yeah.
And you know, the rise of Amazon and really iPhones and like all of that.
Yeah, totally.
Wallace's predictions in Infinite Jest, which you got to think were written in like 92, 93, 94.
Yeah.
You know, it's off in a lot of ways, and writing about like cartridges rather than something like streamed through the internet, like that was too wild.
I think there is one reference where he talks about streaming, like direct streaming, right? But mostly it's cartridges.
It's cartridges, right? And like the whole telephony thing, like it's very much stuck in the paradigm of its times.
Yeah.
And you know, when people sometimes talk about Infinite Jest as a work of science fiction, I tend to think like not really. You know, he's looking ahead 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
With all of the assumptions that he has in that moment. You know, it's not assuming like, okay, you know, the virtual reality is like way progressed beyond where it was in 95. Like, you have to assume that some things progress technologically in sort of wild ways. And he didn't really do that or get that right. And really, even just as a human being, like forget the fiction, like, even in the book tour of Infinite Jest with Lipsky and with other people, he's talking about virtual reality pornography. And like to him, that's sort of the end point of like
civilization,
you know, hitting the pleasure sensors that we will have to, you know, develop new defenses against. Right, and it's like that actually turned out not to be the menace.
To him, right?
Yeah, it's like that actually is not the menace. Like I don't know of anyone who is like, well, that's really the problem today is VR porn. It's like, no, it's actually like, it's such a niche, small thing. You know, it turned out to just be the ubiquity of the internet in everyone's pockets.
Right.
So I think that's interesting. Him asking Don DeLillo for like publishing advice on contracts with his
it's funny
online publishing. It's like, seriously?
Yeah, he calls it like some sort of video game reality. I'm not gonna. He signs off organically yours, David Wallace. That reminds me of like you know, your own organic daddy, stuff like that from Infinite Jest about Joel's father. Okay, should we just keep pressing on? We're getting there.
Yeah, let's do a couple more and then we'll just call it quits on this project. We're not going to do another episode, Dave. This is. We're pretty far along in the past an hour for sure here.
Yeah. Okay, listener, we're getting to a point where we want to wrap up. We're at about an hour and 20 minutes. We don't want to do another episode here, so we're going to sort of cherry pick the last few to talk about, and then we'll put a bow on the Don DeLillo Wallace letters. So Matt, what are some remaining letters, any come to mind that stand out to you? I'm just going to kind of scroll here and see if any jump out to me.
A couple of notes. One, in 2001, he goes to France. Wallace goes to France to this monastery.
The Buddhist monastic retreat.
Yeah. And then The Corrections comes out and gets a lot of acclaim for Franzen. And at the same time, Wallace is writing the grammar piece for Harper's. So I think that's a really pivotal time. He's also working on the math book later in 2001, 2002, which
he is not very positive about to DeLillo here. He calls it the wretched math book in a 2002 postcard.
Yeah. And then what else? A couple years later, 2004, he says he's engaged. He also says he sends, I think, at the end of 2004, the wedding announcement card with the pic of him like clicking his heels, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And there's a note in that where it looks like he's like, my ass looks really big in this photo, but I assure you my ass is not really that big.
Yeah. And I made a note either in that one or in July of 2004, he makes the fish don't know it's wet joke.
Yes.
Two fish swimming along.
Yeah.
So that was on his mind. And he's writing the Kenyon commencement speech in late 2004 for 2005. He was also writing that thing Host about this really awful guy.
Radio personality.
What else? I would say the last one that made an impression on me is the one from 2006 where he says that work is going shittily.
Poorly, slowly. But he likes being married.
Yeah. He likes being married, but he's working on what is the Pale King, and it's a real struggle for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
He
talks about Italy and that writer's thing in Italy in that letter, 2006.
Oh, yeah, and going to the Isle of Capri, right?
Yeah.
I think he tried to get DeLillo to go, right?
Oh, really? Like, who is all there? Franzen, Zadie Smith,
Nathan Englander, maybe Eugenides too.
Yeah, Eugenides. That sounds familiar.
Karen Green.
Yeah.
He also calls him, maybe we said this in the last one, we calls him D2 or D squared.
Yeah, D squared, yeah. D squared. Yeah, that's good. He says in a 2007 July letter that Capri was good, but high socialization factor. It was a dream vacation they couldn't afford otherwise. Also in that, he says, this is great, quote, if/when everyone who's read the Constitution marches on Washington, maybe I'll see you there. So Bush was in his last year of presidency that year.
And then, and going back to 2003, he makes a mention of going to Dia's lightning field, which is an art installation in New Mexico. It's these huge lightning rods, and the idea is you go there during a storm and watch lightning strike them. And I've always wanted to go and see that, so I was sort of jealous that Wallace went there. I don't know if you picked up on that at all. But.
No, I missed it. I read it, but I didn't know what he was talking about.
Well, and I sort of felt like anytime he did something cool, he wanted to tell DeLillo about it.
Yeah.
Going to France, going to Italy, going to whatever, going to see this lightning field. It was like he used that as a pretense or an excuse to write to Don DeLillo.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's true. I like that. There's a part where he says he's going to Tucson in July in 2001. Do you have any hiking suggestions, Don?
Yeah, I'm sure he does.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Interestingly, in 2002, in December, he tells him that there's much to love in Cosmopolis, that the prose is as finely wrought as anything you've done, that one section knocks the reader out of his footwear. I think there's some good prose in Cosmopolis, but overall it's not even close to my favorite DeLillo.
Yeah, it's not a great book in my opinion at all.
Yeah.
I think that's, I could go off on a few tangents, but I will probably save that for another time.
Okay.
There's one, maybe we mentioned this before, where Wallace says that his dog Drone died 10 days before Christmas.
And that it'll be a sad Christmas.
Yeah. That's terrible.
Yeah.
Really terrible.
totally. There's an interesting line in the July 2004 letter in which Wallace says that catatonia muteness between fathers and sons is an obsession. And I wrote, no kidding.
Yeah.
Next to this.
And I also felt
thinking
the
about
same
Hal
way.
And James. Yeah.
And DeLillo kind of has that same obsession, but I also think I was really struck by that letter in that was one of the last times that I saw him. I saw Wallace in July of 2004 in New York.
Mm-hmm.
He came there for a reading with George Saunders at the Public Theater.
Wow. It's a good night.
It was probably July 1st or June 30th, somewhere around there. And my friends Martina and Marco were in town. Mm-hmm. And after the event, this is probably on July 2nd, got him to sign a wedding card for me. So I was really trying to date this letter, right? Like, you know, did he write this from New York? Right. And like, did he see... Yeah. I think that he only saw DeLillo twice in his life, in real life. But I think...
Yeah, I think so.
He could have seen him at some of these other times when he was in New York City, you know, where DeLillo lives just north of there. So, yeah, I was definitely trying to, like, triangulate that particular...
Yeah, right, yeah. There's a great moment in January, I'm assuming 2005, there's no year. If you're feeling avuncular, that's how it starts. He's been approached by a university archive about housing a repository of personal materials. It's like, do you have any experience with this? Yeah. Scholars are going to make use of these papers. Have you ever let a library do this for you? If so, why? So Wallace seems really perplexed about this. And now the great irony here is that, of course, both of their papers are at Harry Ransom, and we're talking about them right now.
Yeah, and I mean, Wallace seems really naive in a lot of that, you know? Like, he doesn't work with a lot of people who sell their archives.
Right, yeah.
So this is sort of a working relationship between him and Don DeLillo. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't really see a response from DeLillo in there, you know?
Yeah.
About that question. Be interesting. We should track that down. What did
DeLillo you'd have to look in the DeLillo letters, yeah. There's a great Christmas card later with no date, the stock text of which says, "May the peace and blessing of Almighty God descend upon you and remain with you forever." And then there's the thing that says, "A certificate of the Mass will be offered for the intentions of blank." And then Wallace notes, "Already paid for, use as you wish, like some sort of cosmic gift certificate." That's fun.
It's pretty wild.
Yeah. I think that covers most of the highlights and the last bits there, and others we talked about last time. I do want to bring up, there is an empty blank file folder in one of these boxes, which my friend Tim Person had me look up, and it's titled Emptiness/Closeness Essay, and there's nothing inside the folder. Do you have any insights on what this is referring to, what this is?
I have no idea.
Okay. I think it's one of the mysteries that scholars will get to solve.
I have to think about it. I mean, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Tim's working on figuring this out, so we'll see what he comes up with. A lot of that
stuff turned into parts of the Pale King, you know?
Yeah, maybe, yeah.
Pretty much everything he was doing at that time turned into parts of the Pale King. But
sure, yeah.
I don't know. I'll have to think on that one.
Yeah.
There are some standalone things in there. I should qualify that statement. But I think the last thing I want to say for this episode is that, you know, I was lucky enough to go to New York and the memorial for Wallace at NYU in October of 2008. And Don DeLillo was there, and of the people who spoke, all of those memorials are collected several places, and some in Harper's, some in Five Dials.
Yeah, and some in the legacy of David Foster Wallace.
Right. Yep. And but the for me being in the room there, like, and I was like right down front. I was like, I want to see this. They were all very moving, but seeing Don DeLillo get up there, I mean, he was Don DeLillo.
Yeah.
And, the first word out of his mouth and sort of, he's a small guy, but like this booming voice of infinity.
Yeah.
It was very moving. And so like, I still think he probably did the best memorial to Wallace of anyone. And that's a testament to how close he and Wallace were in this correspondence.
Yeah.
And I really, through that, I do see the power of correspondence and letter writing, which I personally really value. And I just want to read, like, this is probably too long, but I want to read the last like 2 paragraphs of DeLillo's memorial for Wallace, because it's something that comes back. It's something that comes back to me every year on September 12th.
Right.
DeLillo says, "We see him now as a brave writer who struggled against the force that wanted him to shed himself. Years from now, we'll still feel the chill that attended news of his death. One of his recent stories ends in the finality of this half sentence, not another word. But there is always another word. There is always another reader to regenerate these words. The words won't stop coming. Youth and loss. This is Dave's voice. American." And that to me is like just such the, his was the shortest piece, and like it's just such quintessential Don DeLillo style of writing, but applied directly towards his friend.
Yeah.
A mentee, fellow writer. I mean, it's really powerful, I think. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's good. I like that finish. So I guess we'll say the end of the things we say at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, tell us if people want to know more about these letters. I would say they should come to Austin, Texas, and let me know. Give me a heads up if you're in town, as always.
Yeah.
I would say a couple of things we don't often say in the podcast, and that's please go on Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating or review. It actually helps other people discover the show if they're Wallace fans.
I've heard people say that, yeah.
You can also go or leave it on your favorite listening app. I think we're in all major podcasting apps, including Spotify. And if you haven't listened to the show before today or in a long time, you can go back and listen to old episodes at greatconcavity.podbean.com. And in addition to that, we're in a lot of social media places. Dave, what is our handle?
We are at Concavity Show on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to get really specific and email us, we are concavityshow@gmail.com. We love getting emails from people, so fire away with that. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, ideas for future guests, we love hearing all that stuff. We take it seriously. We take it under advisement. We are also on patreon.com. We want to thank 2 new patrons that we got since last episode. Thank you so much to Paul Lapriado and to Steve Lively. You guys are amazing. We want to thank you so much for your support, for helping continue this show, for making it possible. And like I said last episode, that money was really tangibly used in helping cover costs for helping me get to Austin and to the archive, and for making this possible. We've got some stuff in the hopper for next year that is also going to use the Patreon funds in a way that will be really significant and helpful and beneficial for episodes and things like that. So huge thanks to our Patreon supporters. You can check us out there. We'll link to it in the show notes as well. We're going to be doing our annual send out for our $3 a month patrons, Matt, coming up quick here. We've got everything in the mail, I think, to your house.
Yep.
So those people can look forward to some mail here in November, and we'll put some spoilers and stuff on Instagram in the next little while of things that we got made for that. And as usual, we want to thank, of course, Robin O'Neill for her amazing art associated with our show logo. And she's actually got a really big show in Dallas Fort Worth for the next, I think, till
at
February.
Fort Worth Modern. At the Fort Worth Modern. Yeah, it goes through February. It's called We the Masses.
We the Masses.
She has also a pop-up shop on the Fort Worth Modern shop. And I've already bought some stuff. I'm really excited. I'm going up there in December, I'll be up there. And so if you're in Fort Worth or you can make the trip, please do so before February to get a rare glimpse at a lot of Robin O'Neill's work. So it's very exciting.
I am so sad this show didn't happen this summer when I was in Texas. I absolutely would have gone there.
Yeah.
It's infuriating to be in New Zealand when something like this is happening, where there's just like no possible way I could afford to get to it. But if you live in that area, an adjoining state to Texas, friggin' do yourself a service and go see this show. The pictures of it look amazing. We also want to thank Parquet Courts for their music, Instant Disassembly. That is the intro and outro music. And that's pretty much a wrap on episode 49.2. We'll see you next time for episode 50, coming soon.
Turn on the white noise murmur of the AM band and the last classic rock bands, last solid record.
Do you have headphones in,
I got
Dave?
waves. I got headphones in.
Do you have
I got waves. I got waves and lines. Yeah.
Great.
If I didn't have headphones in at episode 49.2 right now, I'd be such an amateur. Still am, but